Thanks, John.
Yep, the IT team put it together.
Okay, Amy.
Welcome, Council and Plan Commission members, to this joint workshop, Transportation, a Safe Systems Approach. So similar to the last council workshop, we will be providing some objectives and assumptions as we move forward. We will also be talking then, providing information on a safe systems approach and complete streets. We'll talk a little bit about implementation that's happening within the community, and we will save time for questions and answers. So as we've done in the past, it's probably best if you can write your questions down, hold them for that time, and let us just roll through the presentation. We'll return back to some of the assumptions at the end as well. So we'll be shooting for a 6:15 hard stop so that we can reorganize the room too. So as we move into objectives and assumptions, I just want to provide a little context for some of the graphics that you might be seeing as we work through the presentation. So it's probably more than 10 years ago now, I was working for the city of La Crosse when we hired Tool Transportation Group to come do some transportation visioning with us. There was an engineer named Ian Lockwood who came up from Florida to give us the history of transportation in this country and how we could imagine a new transportation system in La Crosse and what it would mean and the changes to our community. Made a big impression on me. So it is with a nod to him that I've incorporated some of the graphics that you're going to be seeing. So this one, for example, the glass on the left, built solely for cars. The glass on the right, incorporating much more of a community into our transportation system. So with that, which glass do you want to live in? So objectives, we're going to provide information on the safe transportation systems. We'll check on those assumptions that I had mentioned on how staff is looking to proceed. And this graphic again. So as you increase your speed, you lose livability on the right-hand side. So on to assumptions. So similar, again, to your last workshop, we've pulled together these assumptions that as we look forward into how we implement the Focus River Falls plans, we want to check these assumptions against what all of your thoughts are for our transportation systems. So right now I'm simply going to read through these, and you can think about them as we go through the workshop. You'll also note that they are on a handout in front of you, so you can reference them as well. So we will prioritize safe, predictable transportation for all modes over fast vehicle transportation. We will view transportation on a system-wide scale, not a neighborhood scale. And additionally, all system users must share responsibility in the system. We have adopted plans, and we will implement them. That implementation will require additional funding sources. It will most likely happen incrementally, and staff needs to work on how that financing plan is going to roll out. In addition, from a council involvement perspective, we're looking at certain touch points, such as the requirements of the purchasing policy, other required approvals like sign changes, grants, etc., photo opportunities like we've had in the past, and there's most likely potential for a council liaison on a Safe Streets Task Force in the future. The last bullets here are just to highlight recent council priorities for transportation, which have included the Vision Zero resolution adopted last April. That is also a copy that's in front of you on your desk. In strategic initiatives planning back in 2023, council highlighted walkability, improved transportation, sidewalk connectivity, and a safe, friendly community as well. And of course, the adoption of the recent Focus River Falls plans. So, okay, it's time to turn this over to our guest speaker. Andi Bill is the Traffic Safety Engineer Research Program Manager for the Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory at UW-Madison. We first met Andi the beginning of last year, and as we learned more about what her and her team does, we got kind of excited and started planning this workshop for you. So in that meantime, we've worked with Andi on some data collection, some plans around Cascade and Main intersection to potentially make it safer. And we're very excited to have her here. Did I mention that her and her team's work are free to us? It is. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll turn it over to Andi, and I thank you so much for traveling here today in this lovely spring Wisconsin weather. So turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. Perfect. Yes, we were going to plan this workshop in January and February, and we're worried about the travel, so we thought March would be safe, and of course that happens that way. So as Amy mentioned, my name is Andi Bill. I have two hats at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. One is in the Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory, working on research with regards to traffic safety and connected and automated vehicles. And the other is the local technical assistance program. And so that is opportunities to provide free training and technical assistance to all 1,700 plus units of government in Wisconsin. So I'll be talking about making our roads safer for everybody as we go through here. I'll just take that over. All right, so we have a national goal and a state goal, 0 in Wisconsin. So just kind of by a show of hands here, or a head nod here, how many of you guys think this is a reasonable goal? So 0 fatalities in Wisconsin. Usually people are shaking. Okay. So as we think about this, usually I have people kind of go, is it reasonable? I don't know, right? Because it's humans, and humans make mistakes, and sometimes they're stupid, and things happen, right? And so, people say like, okay, yes, it's a goal, it's a vision, but really, can we get there? And then my next usual question is, well, then what is acceptable? Is it 100? Is it 50? Is it 10? Is it even 2? And as we think about it, getting down to 2 is which 2 people? Is it going to be me and Amy? Is it going to be, who's 2? Who do we get there? And so I really think that we should be striving for Vision 0 and making sure that we're looking at preventable fatalities. As we think about who's involved, it's everybody here. It's our public safety. It's our, police, our fire, our EMS, and everybody else that's involved with it. And we'll talk a lot about what we can do and then kind of how we're doing as we go forward with it. So this is a crash clock, which might be a little bit hard to see here, but since Amy and I have been talking for the past 10 minutes, there's already been 2 property damage crashes. Probably more with the weather that we're seeing out front here. By the time I get done talking, there will be already kind of 1 injury or fatal crash in the state of Wisconsin. If we think about what we see with regards to, airplanes, right? We get these kind of ideas of, okay, if a 747 goes down, everybody knows about it. Everybody's talking about it. There has been an outcry to saying what's going to be done, right? The Boeing CEO just had to step down because of everything that was going on. We have a lot of traffic crashes. We have a lot of people dying on our roads every single day that we don't really talk about because we get kind of immune to it, right? There's always that other person. I'll show my gray hair here and talk about Rain Man, right? Like I'm a very good driver. It's everybody else that's causing the problems out there. And it's really important for us to think about this here in this crash clock. So, think about it in terms of a pedestrian's injured or killed every 7 hours. And that's kind of, we overdo this over a whole year. Think about just when the pedestrians can be walking outside, and our bicyclists injured or killed every 14 hours. These numbers are kind of staggering. And when we think about it in terms of public safety, this is a public health crisis that we need to be examining. Our ideas of safety have changed over time. We've kind of thought about it as this fatalistic standpoint. Even our words have changed. And I really want to context this in saying words matter. We used to call it accidents all over time. And accidents kind of conjure up this idea that it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. It was God's will, it was luck that went along with it. We then moved into this legal standpoint of saying, well, who's at fault? I want to know who to blame. Who do I put my fingers at? To the point now where we're saying, man, it's not an accident. There is something that caused this. There's multiple causations, and really gets into that scientific standpoint. And I won't quiz you guys on your physics, but we have our force equals mass times acceleration. And we know that what happens is really with regards to energy transfer. And that's really what we're going to kind of focus on, is that energy transfer associated with it. Oh, there, it went there. Let's go. Okay. So this whole idea of the safe system approach came out. I've been giving this presentation for a while. I'm an engineer, so I can't come up with anything fancy. So the first graphic on the top left is what I came up with when thinking about our system. And this is sidewalk to sidewalk all of our trails, all of our system put together is saying we can break down this into our kind of 4 components. The feds came out with their safe system approach, and I think it's fabulous because they added post-crash care, which I think is a very important component to whether a crash is survivable or not survivable, is how fast EMS can get there and information with regards to it. So the analogy that I'm going to give is my grandmother used to make an amazing cherry pie with no topping on it, just the cherry pie itself. And I was a brat kid, and I would always try to steal a little piece of that cherry pie before she was ready for it. And if I was smart, I would just take a small sliver of that cherry pie out, and it would ooze in and kind of fill up that mistake that I just took out. But if I was a brat and took out more pieces of that pie, a hole would be there, and she would notice that and smack my hand. Our system is the same way, right? We have this system out there that says, okay, how do we improve each part of it? So I'll take, for example, my drive up here today. I have a newer Subaru, so my vehicle has all of the safety features associated with it. So it's got the adaptive cruise control, it's got the emergency braking, and the lane assist. The roads and roadside, once I got past Eau Claire, we're getting a little bit hazy, right? So we had some winter weather out there and are looking at it. Speeds, I dropped my speed because of that roadway characteristics, and I'm a safety professional, right? So I wasn't distracted at all inside my vehicle, other than being worried about Amy. Like, okay, when do I, am I going to get there on time? And so I wasn't distracted by looking at my phone, but I was distracted in my brain. So even something like this, right, the drive up here, you can see how I started taking pieces of that pie out. I got here safe and sound, so there wasn't any issue with it. But you can start to say, okay, maybe I wasn't driving my Subaru that had great tires. Maybe there was something else going on. So I take a piece of that pie out. Not only was there winter conditions on the roadway, but maybe I took some back roads. So I start taking a little larger piece of that pie out. And say, because I was running late, I started pushing my speed a little bit. So I take that piece of the pie out. And if I was on some rural roadways, maybe from a post-crash care standpoint, no one found me right away if I did get into a crash. So I start taking that piece of the pie out. It doesn't take long for our system to start to have a hole in that pie and grandmother to get really mad at us. And the same thing is to think about here on our system over our roadways itself. Of no one's out there usually trying to make a mistake. We're usually out there just a momentary inattention and saying, okay, is our system robust enough to cover up that mistake? And we'll talk a little bit more about that here. So traditionally with the 3 E's or more, we started off with, every road safety problem can be solved by applying the 3 E's. Engineering, education, and enforcement. Over the years, we've started to go into EMS, evaluation, example, encouragement, everyone. I think this is great. So it was actually developed in 1915, and it was promoted by the auto industry. I think, personally, that this works best for issues that involve a relatively small number of agencies and stakeholders, because it can be difficult to apply to problems that cut across professional disciplines or agency boundaries. We get a lot of, it's not my problem, it's their problem, right? So kind of pointing fingers. I get this a lot with regards to impaired driving and run off the road crashes, especially in the southern part of the state. Engineering will say, okay, well, that's an enforcement issue. And enforcement says, well, that person ran off the road and hit a tree. So maybe it's an engineering issue. And so you kind of get into this, I don't know what to do with it, so we're just not going to do anything with it. Another example would be a single vehicle run off the road crash involving fatigued drivers. These are fairly common out there. They're not isolated to a specific location. Roadway reconstruction is very expensive. So, okay, well, we'll just wait to see if more happen. From an enforcement standpoint, law enforcement might say, well, where do I go to look for fatigued drivers? How do I look for fatigued drivers and what's going on with it? In education, like we're still trying to do drug and alcohol impairment. How do we get to fatigued driving? And so it can kind of get into these examples where you go, I don't know what to do, so we'll just wait and see. I would argue that our safe system approach starts to give us some better information with that, right? So from a safe vehicle standpoint, we now have vehicles, right? If we think about that pie, we're going to start to bump up this piece of the pie where we have our lane assists. We have the ability to have adaptive cruise control and emergency braking. We also have vehicles now, so the newer Ford vehicles monitor your steering and monitor your acceleration. And if they start to see a lag, it'll beep at you and tell you that maybe you should stop. My Subaru will actually, at 2 hours after the ignition's on, it stops and says, it doesn't stop, but it blinks and says, do you need a coffee break? And I have a caffeine addiction, so I'm like, I do. Thank you, car. Thanks for recognizing that. I do. From our safe speeds, we're always trying to make sure that our roads are at the speeds that we need it to go to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. From our roadsides, right, we have rumble strips. We try to improve our clear zones. We try to have better guardrails out there so that if you do leave the lane, you're not going to hit a fixed object at a high rate of speed. For our post-crash care, we're trying to make sure that our EMS are being able to get called to the scene quicker, and we're making sure that the trauma centers are there and better connecting some of that information together. And from the safe road users, we're trying to do more to understand that fatigue driving is impaired driving. So a problem that was kind of I don't know what to do with it, you can see we are trying to address it in this kind of system approach to it. And it's got a kind of it's not their problem, it's my problem, but all together working together on this. Here are the principles. Human bodies don't withstand crash forces well. Duh, right? We are not meant to get hit by giant objects. And so I'm going to go back to this slide here for a second. So back to our physics. We have an SUV that weighs about 4,400 pounds. Our vehicles are actually getting heavier in time, whether it's an electric vehicle or just the vehicles themselves, because we're trying to do more to prevent, you're trying to absorb that energy. And so our vehicles are actually getting heavier over time. So if that vehicle hits a worker, by the way, if you don't see these signs and think of them as a person feeding the whale, you're welcome. You'll never be able to see a work zone sign ever again and not think about it as a person feeding the whale. But we know that kinetic energy transfer is 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared. So I already said that we are increasing the masses of our vehicles. The velocity squared, so at 20 miles per hour, it's a 70 kilojoule energy transfer. 30 miles an hour, it's 190 kilojoules. And at 60, it's 770 kilojoules. Okay, Andi, great. Thanks for telling us about kilojoules. What does that mean? So this is what it means. If I am driving at 40 miles an hour and I hit Amy who's walking, I have an 85% chance of killing her. If I am traveling at 20 miles an hour, I have a 5% chance of killing her. Remember what I said before about words matter. As we think about this, we really have to think about the driver's interaction with a person. I get a little twitchy when I read news articles that talk about a vehicle hitting a pedestrian. Yes, the vehicle was the mechanism, but there was somebody driving it. And so even as I talk about this, you'll hear me kind of personalize it and get going. I love Amy, so I'm not going to hit her. But it's just making sure that we think about it in this way. Am I saying that every roadway should be at 20 miles an hour? No. I know that that is not going to happen for the safe and efficient movement of people and goods. But we do have to really think about this in terms of where do we have the people and vehicle interactions, and how do we get those speeds low enough so that when someone makes a mistake, not if, but when someone makes a mistake, they don't take somebody's life. Okay? And so kind of thinking about those in those terms really help get our idea of this system approach to our roadway network. It's not just, okay, every roadway should be at 20 or every roadway should be at 40, but what are those interactions? Where do we have bikes and pedestrians kind of coming together? So I'm going to go back here quickly to this principles. So human bodies don't withstand crash forces well. We kind of already talked about that. We also know that human bodies withstand crash forces differently. Our bodies can resolve more G-forces, absorb more G-forces front to back than it can side to side. Same is true in football, right? The side hits are a lot harder on somebody than the front to back. And so even as we think about how we're designing our roadways, it's why roundabouts are safer than regular traditional intersections, because we're bringing vehicles slower and at an angle so that if a crash or when a crash happens, it is less severe than those right angle crashes at high speeds. So kind of everything that we're thinking about in designing our roadways, how do we minimize the speed, how do we minimize the energy transfer and keep it as soft as possible based on that. Instead of trying to eliminate all crashes, we want to focus on preventing death and serious injury from those crashes. We know that there's crashes that do involve an element of misbehavior, but many are just due from simple momentary inattention. I won't make you guys raise your hand, but at least I can say that I've driven through a traffic signal before and wondered afterwards, is it red or green? My brain processed it. It was probably green, but there was a momentary inattention on my spot that I didn't really even process that. So there are things like that that happen all the time. We want to strengthen all parts of our system, our roads, roadside speeds, vehicles, users, and our post-crash care. And then as Amy already mentioned, that system designers and system users must share a responsibility for managing crash forces to a level that doesn't result in death or serious injury. There's a southern state that when you get your driver's license, you sign a memorandum of understanding. It is not a contract. It's not legally binding, but it goes through all of these things within kind of an emphasis area that they says, if I don't wear my seatbelt in the car, I become a missile, I become a projectile inside the vehicle. If I speed, I am causing, this is the energy transfer. And so it kind of just goes through a step-by-step through about what that system user's responsibility is, right? So a lot of us get our driver's license, we're like, woohoo, we're free. We get to go do whatever we want, but understanding that it is all part of the system together. Okay, I'll go forward here. Safety cultures in the same part have to change over time. And you guys being here today, I really appreciate this. You guys are already down to meaning that more proactive and that generative kind of safety culture that's out there. This is information that's out there of saying we're actively searching for ways to improve the performance and reduce the risk on our system. This not only has to happen in an organization like you guys are doing here, but also within our general public and information of that sort. So we've moved away from that pathological standpoint and even that reactive standpoint and really thinking about it in terms of our proactive ways of thinking about this and looking at this. Okay, I'm just going to check my time here because I'm going to go through a perfect timing. Okay, so the next slide, as we think about safety, I want you to think about it not just in terms of where crashes happened, but thinking about it in terms of the risk associated. So I want you guys to all just think about in your head, if you've had children in your house, grown children in your house, or just nieces and nephews, how did you decide where to put those sockets, those little plugs into your electrical sockets? Did you wait for them to put their finger in one and then plug that one and then wait for them to put their finger in the next one and then go and run and plug that one? Probably not, right? You said, okay, the kid is starting to crawl. It's probably going to start to put their fingers in things that they're not supposed to. So we go ahead and in our homes, we think about this as being a more proactive safety measures, right? We say, okay, these all have the same risk. We don't wait for something to happen and then fix it. We say, okay, these all have the same level. So let's think about it from a maintenance standpoint or a sign inventory standpoint to improve that safety as we go a little bit. And that's really what we're going to talk about here in the complete streets side of the house as well too, is what can we be doing to thinking about our network, our system in a more proactive way so that we're not waiting for someone to put their finger in the socket or not waiting for somebody to crash, but we're saying, okay, these all have the same characteristics. Let's go ahead and fix them now when money is available. So we're going to transfer from that safe system approach kind of as that background more into this context-sensitive design and solutions. The principles are kind of the same. It's the safe for all users and modes. And again, it's a system approach, right? So we know that it's not just vehicles, it's pedestrians, it's bicyclists, it's e-bikes, it's transit. It's our mobility impaired, things of that sort, and looking at it. This involves shared stakeholder vision. We want to make sure we have everybody at the table, community members, elected officials, interest groups, affected local, state, and federal agencies that can help. And the design outcomes meet or exceed the expectations of both the designers and the stakeholders. Therefore, lasting value to the community environment of the transportation system. We're looking for effective and efficient use of resources. So we have a shared vision that provides a basis for decisions and looking at it. We want to understand that there's no kind of right size on this. It's really understanding what each stakeholder has and then saying, how do we meet those needs as best as possible? It is improving the communication and the collaboration to achieve consensus. There is a lot of this debate back and forth, and so we really want to think about kind of how do we all put it together. And the flexibility and creativity to shape effective transportation solutions while preserving and enhancing community and natural environments, really thinking about that placemaking standpoint. So it's a large range of goals beyond just the transportation problem. So it's livability, sustainability, active transportation. We know that we get more people out of their vehicles that are biking and walking and improves the longevity of their life and kind of pulls that all together and makes people more of a community. We understand that. And so then how do we think about our transportation system as being placemaking instead of just a from here to there situation? And that definitely, as an engineer, that took me a while. I was like, well, I build roads. We go from here to here as quickly as possible. And really taking a step back to saying our transportation network is really about pulling people together. It's pulling our community, our constituents together to improve their way of life. I work a lot in the city of Racine, and the mayor down there said, transportation, I'm making my community members better by improving the transportation. So how do we do that? What do we need to do? And it's really kind of thinking about that in those terms versus just getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. So this can be used at federal, state, and local departments of transportation like you guys are talking about here. You can achieve these outcomes such as livable communities, other terms that are called as healthy transportation and active living, sustainability, and then what we're going to be talking about is complete streets moving forward. So this context-sensitive solutions and design is a way to get to complete streets. These are all kind of synonyms for the same thing, so you might hear people talk about them as we go forward. So now we're going to transfer now into that complete streets and kind of talking a little bit more about it. So over the past couple of years, we have over 1,400 complete streets policies that are passed in the United States, including 33 state governments in Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. What we're looking for is safe and comfortable and convenient for all modes of travel, so automobiles, bicyclists, pedestrians, transit, and we're getting into a whole slew of new types of modes of travel, right? So the scooters and everything else that kind of goes along with it. I don't know if you guys have ATVs yet, but we have a lot of ATVs down where I go, and so it's really looking at those as well as part of our modes of transportation. Ensures that the entire right-of-way, so that whole system, is planned and designed and operated to provide safe and access and mobility for all users. We want to make sure we integrate people and places into planning, design, construction, operation, and the maintenance of transportation network. It is just kind of a different focus a little bit. All of this usually does improve motor vehicle travel as well by making it a little bit smoother to get through and being able to integrate everybody together. So agencies must consider the needs of current and future users when designing a new roadway, resurfacing, or reconstructing an existing roadway. So this takes a little bit of looking at that magic 8-ball. Again, I'm dating myself, but looking at that magic 8-ball to say, okay, what are our modes going to be in the future? Do we have improved or different land uses coming? What's the transportation network going to look like? What's our community growth patterns? And I know you guys have put a lot of energy into kind of understanding that and examining it. What is our stakeholder input? And then what are other policy goals that go along with it? So with everything, right, there's always a problem. We have limited amount of space within the right-of-way, and we have many competing demands that go along with it. We have large trucks that need a very large radius to get through our intersections. We have pedestrians that need to get across closer, and so when we have those large radii, we make the distance larger for our pedestrians to cross, and then we have blind spots. And so there's always this kind of tug of war a little bit. And so trying to understand that. We want to look at there are design standards that are out there and guidelines that are common, but they usually come from like one of two sources, either research effort or it's worked for decades. And so we're not really going to question it. So there's really no scientific basis behind it. And so it's really about saying, well, we know what's best for our community. We understand and we want to try different things. We want to look at it to say, how do we incorporate these different types of community aspects as we move forward? So I talked about speed a little bit, and I'll try not to get on my soapbox too much about speed, but we know that newer designs keep widening lanes. And so we say, okay, we need to widen lanes to 12 foot, to 14 foot, because we need to get to different types of vehicles that are out there. You could probably think about your own self a little bit. When you think about driving down a roadway, if the roadway is wide open and straight, do you have a tendency to travel faster or slower? I won't make you guys raise your hand. I personally will travel a little faster. I feel more comfortable. If I start to feel like I'm a little more narrow on it, I start to feel a little bit more kind of tight, I'm going to slow down. And if we're thinking about, again, managing that energy transfer, it's how do we make sure that we're not kind of causing harm to our population that does not or cannot drive. So there's some information there on that. And so we're really kind of thinking about that to saying, okay, how do we look at keeping our roadways to the width that we need them to be for our emergency vehicles, for our trucks that need to be able to get through there, but also understanding that the larger the road, the straighter the road, the higher the speed is going to be. And so those contradict. And so we need to be able to kind of look at that and understand it. We know that everybody kind of needs their separation or partially shared designated space. We have our sidewalks that are out there, then we have our bike lanes, and then we have our parking lanes, and then we have our travel lanes. And so these competitions go back and forth. And so we need to make sure that we are adequately providing that information out there and understanding whether the type of walkers and bikers and other road users that are out there. If we think about it, we have some bikers that are very comfortable biking on 55-mile-an-hour roadways and sharing the lane with motor vehicles. I am not one of those. I get very nervous. And so I feel more comfortable in a bike lane. And so again, it's that kind of back and forth kind of saying, what do our customers, what do our residents feel comfortable with, and then what can we provide given those different scenarios that are out there and are looking at it. These are the benefits of complete streets. It's not just about the vulnerable road users, but it is an improved safety for all modes. And this gets back into, again, won't make you say it or things, but just thinking back to when you're driving. And I have had situations myself where a pedestrian, I'm coming out of the university and the A-pillar of my vehicle is blocking that pedestrian. And my heart skips a beat, right? Like, oh my gosh, what would happen if I didn't see that pedestrian? What happens if I was distracted or that pedestrian was distracted? You know, we want to make sure we're improving the safety for all modes, improving mobility and access for our population that cannot or does not drive. There is an improved public and environmental health. It does increase our transportation capacity. So even as we think about narrowing our lanes sometimes and putting roundabouts in, those will improve the transportation capacity and get our motor vehicles through our system faster, and are looking at it. And those other works that are in there. No one size fits all. So each community goes through this exercise and thinks about it in terms of what are the influences that work together with us. And there are ones that are competing and looking at it. At the end of the information today, I'll give an example. We won't go through it in terms of time, but it goes through, you know, how do we think about complete streets, and how does Chris look at it versus Amy versus me versus Todd? All of our opinions are probably going to be different, and it's kind of working together to figure out what works best for that design. We want to make sure we have the flexibility in that design, saying how are we going to develop or change. You know, we used to build roundabouts large to get to that capacity in 20 years. We realized that as we built them that large, that people traveled faster. And so now we're making roundabouts that actually shrink in size. So that central island is very large to begin with. And then as capacity grows, you can shrink that and make that into a multi-lane roundabout at a later point in time. So again, understanding that things can change. We don't have to build everything large to begin with. We can think about how we're going to change that over time. And the flexibility. I want to get to examples. There we go. This is what we want to talk about. So what are others doing? And if we think about complete streets examples, we think about residential areas and then urban areas. So you can see different examples here. The top left that you see on your screen is looking at more of a residential area. You can see the trees. You can see that the trees are blocking the sidewalks. So while there is a fixed object, so if somebody does run off the road, they might hit that tree there. Hopefully the speeds are slow enough so they don't lose their life over that, but it's also blocking our sidewalks. So it gives our younger pedestrians a chance to feel a little bit more comfortable walking right next to that roadway and blocking at it. The upper right, while it's maybe something we wouldn't consider as a complete streets, it's trying to narrow that roadway and having that two-way left turn lane in there, the twiddle that goes along with it. The bottom left shows how we can incorporate some bus lanes as well as traffic, and then being able to look at it. So we think about this in terms of, okay, 10 to 12-foot lanes can be used for rural and urban arterials. We also, narrow lanes maybe aren't just acceptable, but they may show some benefit too of lowering that speed and looking at that. So we can think about those as we go through some examples here. So these are some ideas of ways to slow people down and improve kind of some of that work as we get to that idea of improving all of for our complete streets. So these are called a chicane, and it just kind of changes that roadway from going straight through to having a slight curvature in it, and being able to say, okay, how do we get the traffic to kind of move from one side to the other? This can also be done not by necessarily moving the roadway in a horizontal curvature, but by just changing where the parking is located. Maybe it's on the right side for part of the roadway and then on the left side for the other part of the roadway. And so it kind of just gives this idea of just slowing traffic through. having it be a little bit more meandering, so it's not just a straight shot where you try to race the next light or race the person next to you. A road diet. So this is getting into how do we think about changing our roadway configuration to maybe narrow the lanes and provide more information for a two-way left turn lane or a bike lane or a transit lane. Maybe we have different roadway widths even. So you can see there in the top left, it's kind of the existing conditions, or the left-hand side. You can kind of see how it has a combined parking lane or moving lane depending on the situation, and then a moving lane over there. And now we can change it into a parking lane, a moving lane, and then maybe a two-way left turn lane there in the middle, or a median that kind of goes back and forth a little bit. Even just separating that traffic with that median is going to help slow down our work as we move forward. And when I say slow down, don't worry. Again, I'm not trying to slow everybody down on the roadways. It's just trying to say, what roadways make sense to have a little bit slower speeds, or having people just travel at the speed limit that they want, right? I have a whole presentation that looks at speed limit setting, because people kind of just get used to traveling at 5 to 7 miles an hour over a little bit, even though speed limits are absolute and people should be traveling at that speed limit. People have a tendency to kind of push that a little bit. And so trying to make sure that people are traveling at the speed limit that we have set for that roadway, not necessarily slowing that speed limit down. Roundabouts, kind of already talked about the improvement in slowing vehicles down, being able to change the angle of that, again, is being able to make it more of a community aspect as well. A lot of people in the Central Island will have different types of designs, or highlighting different artists as well to be able to look at it. Bikeways and sidewalks, and so this is showing some different types of pavement marking to be able to really designate that bikeway, to show where those bikes are going, to kind of separate it out so that we don't have vehicles kind of encroaching onto those. So we don't always have to fully separate those bike lanes. We can do that through some other types of markings or bollards that are out there, flexible tubular markers out there as well too, to give the bikes a place to go and keep those vehicles out of that area. There's bike lanes and bike boxes where you get the bikes up to that stop bar as well too, to be able to help them turn and go through it. So there's different options with regards to that. Bike boulevards, so this is kind of the shared component with it, and looking at those different options. So maybe this isn't everywhere, but looking at certain roadway characteristics. Speed humps and speed tables, so depending on your EMS and how this is set up, sometimes these can be a little bit cumbersome for that, and so we want to look at where we're putting these a little bit more strategically, based on if there are a lot of speeders that are out there and are looking at it from that standpoint. Pedestrian refuge islands are a way to have this, if you have a very long crossing, be able to have someone stop and be able to take a break in between that crossing, which is helpful in being able to look at it. So those are kind of the initial steps. I'm a little bit, just a couple minutes over here. I'm just going to introduce this. These slides are available for everybody. There are these kind of street design challenges that kind of gives people an example of how to look at different types of steps to examine your roadway, brainstorm ideas, talk about your, a SWOT analysis, your strength, weakness, opportunities, and solutions with it. Yes, good. And then designing it. And so you have this width, you have these, you've got to have your checklist to be able to go through with it. You actually design it, and then you think about it and talk about it with others to say, okay, how do I look at this and design this? And then kind of talk about what choices you made and why you made it, and how is it meeting the needs of different people in your organization. So just kind of a different opportunity to look at this. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily.
Excellent. Thanks, Andi. Right, so I'm going to switch gears and talk about Focus River Falls. And that was the planning process that just culminated in the adoption of the comprehensive plan, bicycle and pedestrian plan, and outdoor rec plan a year ago today, or it was the 4th Tuesday in March. I'm just going to talk about the pieces that are relevant to our discussion tonight. So the comprehensive plan has 6 overarching goals related to the future of River Falls. The goal of connection speaks to connections between people, but also the systems people use to move from place to place. The goal of access speaks more specifically to the transportation system and emphasizes safe and efficient movement for all the ways people may travel, walking, rolling, biking, or using a vehicle, but particularly for those who may not have access to a vehicle or would like other options instead of driving. Another related goal is resiliency. This speaks to designing a system that can withstand or recover from weather conditions, is in good condition, and that contributes to the health, safety, and welfare of the community to provide a good quality of life for future generations. The comprehensive plan includes a chapter dedicated to the transportation system. So this is the introductory statement in the chapter, and it reiterates the principles in the goals, recognizes the connection between transportation and economic development, and transportation and recreation. The statement notes that an ideal transportation network includes multiple modes, each providing options for the movements of goods and/or people throughout River Falls. The plan identifies specific goals related to transportation, including design elements that provide for accessibility. So in this image where we have the sidewalk infill on Powell and North Main, we've got truncated domes at that point where the sidewalk meets the street to provide safety. And then ensuring that new neighborhoods are well connected via sidewalks and trails. Again, with this infill, we created a critical connection on North Main. Addresses operations and maintenance, creates a system that works for all ages and abilities, and then continuing the conversation about transit opportunities, and then implementing the recommendations of the Bike and Ped plan. During the community engagement process of developing the Focus River Falls plans, people were asked how they currently move throughout the city and what their desired way to move is. You can see from the results that most people drive alone. However, they would prefer to be able to walk or bike. When asked what makes it difficult or what would make it easier to walk and bike, residents noted areas where sidewalks and trails are missing, breaking up connectivity, along with safety concerns. People identified several areas for improvement, including Main Street, Division, and Cascade. When creating facilities for biking in particular, we focus on designing for the 90% of people who express those concerns. If we design sidewalks and trails for those folks, the people who are confident and fearless will also benefit. So like Andi was talking about earlier, there's just a very small percentage of people who are strong and fearless. They'll bike on a highway at 55 miles an hour, but the majority of people are not in that category. And then again, as Andi noted in her presentation, there are a number of strategies that can be employed to increase safety and connectivity for all modes of transportation. The Bike Ped plan recommends trying out some of these strategies as a demonstration project to learn more about the impact and benefits of a potential change, developing a complete streets policy, as Andi talked about, to address all users of the system, explore ways to connect through our parks and open spaces, partner with others on education, and seek partners for funding. So now I will turn it over to Todd, who will talk about how we're already making progress and what's next in the future.
Thank you, Emily. And we do want to point out that although the Bike and Ped plan and comp plan has only been adopted for a year, we have continued to make improvements to our transportation system in the city. When the Sycamore development occurred on South Main Street, we did a pretty major project to align East and West Park Street across South Main Street. With the Oak Hill development, we will be installing a multi-use pathway along 879th Street. With the North Interceptor project that was completed last fall, we installed the new multi-use trail on Paulson Road, which really was a pretty major connection from the Sterling Ponds neighborhood all the way down to North Main Street. Emily mentioned that we did the North Main sidewalk infill that council funded via ARPA money in 2023. We did the AARP grant funded Division and Main intersection demonstration project last summer that highlighted some of the components that Andi just talked about. And as I mentioned, we are looking at improvements at the Cascade and Main intersection with Andi's team. The School District of River Falls recently completed a Safe Routes to School plan, which we participated in an advisory level. DOT recently redid Cemetery Road, repaved Cemetery Road, and with that, there was some significant ADA improvements to all the crosswalks. And of course, we are working on South Wasson Lane reconstruction that we expect to occur this summer, which will include a roundabout at the intersection of Cascade and South Lawson Lane. And moving forward, most of us are aware that the City of River Falls was awarded a DOT Safe Streets for All grant, and this was a direct result of the Vision Zero resolution that Council passed last fall. And I don't have any more on that slide, but talking about what we expect from this grant program, we expect to develop a Safe Streets Action Plan. And with that Safe Streets Action Plan, there will be a data-driven assessment of all roadways in River Falls, studying decades of crash data. There will be recommendations for projects and specific policies to help achieve Vision Zero. And a big part of that project will be a significant community engagement component, which I think Amy mentioned will include a Safe Streets task force that we hope to have council participation on. There is also the potential that our $200,000 grant may include a implementation of a demonstration project. And as far as a timeline for that project, we are looking to be about a 1-year study after we finalize a grant agreement with the federal government. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Amy.
Wow, we are so efficient. We moved quickly through that. So at this point, let's turn it over to questions. Let's see what you might have for us after all of that information. Any thoughts?
I have some questions. So thank you very much, Andi, for being here today, and city staff as well, and I really appreciate your presentation. For me, when I think about Focus River Falls, I think about the connection, access, and resiliency. I know there are two main themes that stick out to me individually in the sense of like what I'm kind of looking at, and you hinted on one would being roundabouts, and like there's one on 2nd and East Division in front of where the St. Bridget School is, where it desperately needs a roundabout, and it's unpredictable traffic, and it's an albatross. Most cities don't have a road like that, and that's our one to really focus. If we're going to focus River Falls, to focus on that one. And I think if we have a matching grant plan, and you do that, I'm sure, right? Like you come up with unique plans like that, and that's kind of what I'm looking for is like, can we have a unique matching grant plan that can maybe take the biggest amount of expense targeted for those really, if you was a color, maybe like, red, these are critical points. I talked about the other week, another theme that I'm looking at is monitor video surveillance program. And, whether it's elderly, people who are on bikes, pedestrians, one of those areas I've identified is between the library and Briarwood. And there's a lot of people who use that crosswalk where it goes from the library to our housing authority there. And it really needs a monitoring program, a surveillance style program, because people speed. And one of the unpredictable things is when people are older, or regardless of their age, that's a hot, critical point that needs something that'll kind of naturally help people recognize the importance of safety, slow it down. And I know same type of theme would be true with the college when they just recently they fixed we fixed that monitor what's it called, it was flashing on and off, and we fixed it so it's not doing that now. But in doing so, people have to get used to the way it should have been. I think that might be another area we should consider looking at with video surveillance, as far as like, because it'll help people naturally get back to behaving and not having unpredictable driving and behavior there. So the monitoring aspect of key locations for sidewalks and the roundabouts are big factors I'm looking at, and I appreciate all the other ones you talked about because they're certainly true in lots of other parts of the city. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Questions? Anybody got questions?
I have a question, and it has to do with parking. I know you're talking about transportation, but a long time ago, we had angle parking. The street was going two ways, angle parking on both sides, very narrow in between. We then went to parallel parking, but our Kinney corridor plan goes back to angle parking. is there any studies that show which is safer, backing out from an angle parking, or because obviously you get more people to park if you do that, versus parallel parking?
It's a great question. I don't think I have anything off the top of my head, but I am sure that there's something out there that looks at the different types of parking, and I can look into that and get some information back to Amy.
Yeah, and I realize this was more moving vehicles, but I can see backing out into people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely backing out into people. I know that the backing in is really helpful, and that a lot of cities have done that, backing into the parking spaces. So that's shown to have like the greatest safety benefit, but I don't know this between pulling in at an angle versus parallel parking.
Yeah, I was going to mention the reverse angle parking where you back into the spots, and for what it allows, like they did it in Austin, and what it allows is for the bike lane to go then between the parking and the driving lane.
It gives better visibility.
Yeah. So you just have to count on the person behind you being nice to let you pull past the spot.
Yeah. With everything, it changes the culture of it.
But people like it. I mean, once it's in, people, of course, lost their minds when they first did it, but it works really well.
Yeah. Change is hard. But yeah, I mean, that not only does it improve for pedestrians and bicycles to go in front of it, but also improves the visibility of being able to go back out as you pull out of those parking spots.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, pertaining to what I was talking about, there are grants available that or included in this that would be for video surveillance type of areas, right?
When you're talking about video surveillance, are you talking about enforcement or just video from a data analysis standpoint?
It would potentially be for both, because one would be like a SCADA system where you can record data flow, and the other one would be for the sense of someone's crossing the road, they push a button, oh, there's video surveillance. Now we can see if there is an incident or something to that effect. So it's a little bit of both categories potentially.
Yeah. So I know for the Safe Streets at All, they do allow for some video data collection on that grant on side of things. In terms of enforcement on anything from the state of Wisconsin, it is illegal by state statute at this point in time, but there is work on being done, especially to allow communities to do that in the future. I think there's something on the floor currently to examine that. In terms of just identifying for pedestrians and trying to communicate that back to the drivers, there are some new devices that are out there to alert folks. We're doing some, and it'll be a few years down the way, but interesting research to look at cell phone usage as pedestrians are coming up and alerting vehicles to say, hey, there's a pedestrian across the road. So kind of that communication back and forth, because pedestrians don't always look up from their cell phones, and being able to have that side of things a little bit. So there are some opportunities for it. It kind of goes back to how is it going to be used and examining it.
I appreciate that. Thanks again.
Well, I was just going to ask, one of the concerns that you often hear is from like firefighters who want wide roads for their big trucks to go real fast to the crashes caused by the wide roads that we build for the firefighters.
Yeah.
So how do you build support for, like road diets and narrowing and roundabouts from that particular audience?
They need to be at the table, right? They need to be in the room having this discussion in advance to be able to look at it and saying, okay, there can be different types of lane configurations, right? So different widths. So maybe there is a larger width for some of those fire trucks to be able to go through. Those two-way left turn lanes are really optional, because then the fire truck can straddle those lanes, right? So it's being able to have that communication to saying, okay, yeah, you want to fit in those lanes, but what are some other options, and being able to look at it. Yeah, but having them at the table is really important.
My question was, so moving forward after tonight, Andi, are you sticking around for more of the stuff going on, or is this kind of the end of your time with us, or?
I am here as long as Amy wants. So okay. Do you want to follow up on that about the university work? So we are working on a plan helping with Cascade in Maine, right?
Yep.
So that'll be kind of that wrap up a little bit, but then if there are other questions or other options, would be available to come back and help.
Okay, so I know we have that going on. So I'm assuming the rest of this is just going to be like we talked about in the comp plan. It's going to be looking for grants that fit for stuff we're working on or we have coming up that we're working on. Just looking at different improvements we can make as we go along. We don't have anything really, other than some of the stuff that we showed that we've already done. We don't have anything really, how do I want to say this? we don't have anything that we're really, okay, we're gonna do this right now, this right now, right, this right now. It's more how it comes along down the road when we find grants. Or, okay, we have to redo this road, we can look at some of this stuff then.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's gonna come as we have the funding to upgrade our roads,
Yep.
or as we find grant opportunities to make some bigger changes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so quick question, so with all the development we got a lot of development going on, which is great. So are we taking some of this into, assuming some of this when we go and talk to the developer, okay, the roads are gonna be like, we want them like this. We don't, you know what I mean? How are we handling some of that stuff?
Yeah, so Scott and I were just talking about this the other day, and the fact that our subdivision ordinance does hold developers to what transportation is going to look like as the new subdivision comes in and how it's going to impact the areas around the subdivision. But when we have redevelopment within the city, we don't necessarily have those same codes. So that's something I think that we need to look at in the future too. We were just having that discussion.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, I think that's a question about development paying its way, which you've talked about in the fiscal plan workshop. So that's probably an area where we're capturing the way we think transportation was, but not the way we think it's going to be. And there's some examples where we've been able to get a little more proactive, like the Sycamore project, where we're kind of imagining that South Main corridor plan and saying, well, we think the road's gonna look like this in the future, and we better get that intersection aligned, and you're gonna pay for it. Did you need to do that for sure for that project? No, but we were expecting that developer is gonna provide some impact. So we're kind of got half in and half out. The example I used in the discussion with Amy was we have a little bit better mechanism and scientific approach to wastewater. So when those developments come in for wastewater, we can kind of estimate what their incremental, you can do the math and have equations about what the impact is on that development, not only on the pipes in the street in front of them, but also what the system capacity is, the wastewater plant, the electricity use. I mean, there's a good system to be able to do that. I think that's developing in the transportation world. There's probably cities that think they have it all figured out. I doubt they do. But Ellers or somebody did an analysis for them saying you're getting 100% of your transportation impact back. I don't think that's as easy to do now. It's also, as the modes are getting beyond my capabilities, but we're going to have automated vehicles. I think it's a certainty, and I'm opining now. We're good ground for that because we're gonna skip whole generations of technology. So we don't have a bunch of sunk costs into a rail car system or light rail or whatever. We have nothing. We have single person car investments. That's what we've made our system around. So as the automation stuff comes in, we can jump right to some of those new modes. Whereas if you're a mid-sized city or it's going to be more that you've got all that inherent cost of hanging on with whatever you have, all your curb and gutter in a certain spot and whatever. Whereas we're going to be positioned, I think, to do that. And we have no mechanism right now to figure out how to get the developers to pay for that. We've started to identify where it's going to be. So you've got the Z, the River Falls Z, where it's going to go from Sterling Ponds kind of down Main Street and then over to the high school cemetery. So you kind of got the route already figured out. There may be a Z with the X where Division Street is part of that. So that's helpful. And then as we get developments along those corridors, we can say, you should be helping us get ready for that future infrastructure, or whatever that might mean. Undergrounding electric and getting stuff out of the way and figuring out where the fiber is going to go to drive all these sensors or whatever we're going to have. So Wastewater, we can figure that out a lot better. And frankly, we're not sure the technology is gonna change that rapidly, that how we're serving sewer today in a house or apartment building is gonna be that much different. But transportation, I think, is gonna be rapidly different than what we see today. You know, SUVs are going up in size, but then we're introducing all these tiny vehicles everywhere. People, I mean, we just got back from DC, and the number of people in three-piece suits on a scooter or skateboard, motorized skateboard, was kind of crazy to me. Like, they got their messenger bag on and they're all decked out, their tie is tight, they're zooming down the traffic all over the place, sidewalks, through parks, in the middle of the street, going the opposite direction of car traffic. So it's like we're getting bigger and smaller at the same time. And so we'll have to deal with that. And we have an entrepreneurial community. So we know that from enterprise creation, that we have a higher level of business enterprise creation than the statewide average by far, because Wisconsin way lags other states. Well, that fits for other stuff too. There's all these first adapters. So every time some new thing comes out, somebody wants to buy it. So there's a new UTV, somebody wants to buy it and start driving it up and down Main Street. E-bikes you see all over the place now. And so you got all this, that's kind of the culture of the community where people want to do this, and we don't have the system set up to deal with it. So we'll be learning as we go, I think. And understand we also have for the grants, we've got this kind of planning grant system, but then we're also working hard on the RAISE program. And that would be kind of a game changer allow us to get significant more investment into the community on a per capita basis, because you're going to leverage those federal dollars in. So then you can really do some pretty significant things. Because like even on Main Street, I can't remember what the cost was. Do you know the approximate cost of the sidewalk infill on North Main for 2 blocks of sidewalk?
That, I think we ended up around $60,000 for that.
Yeah, and that was like only because Todd is a miracle worker and because we did our own project management, right? And I mean, otherwise 2 blocks of sidewalk infill can be like $150,000. So figuring out how we're gonna do all this is gonna be fun too. But that's back to the assumptions, I guess. It's my job as your administrator to try to get you back there. A very important assumption is we did the demonstration project, and I think that's a good one to use as an example. And people are like, well, now I have to wait an extra 5 seconds. And the answer is, according to the assumptions the council's asked us to do, so what? That doesn't matter. That's okay. It's fine. Well, now 2 or 3 cars can't queue there because they have to be over. So now if somebody's going westbound, they have to wait. And our answer is, so what? We've improved the condition for bikers, pedestrians. That's a major assumption of what you baked into the cake here. We just want to make sure you all understand that yeah, queue times for a car with your heat and air conditioning and your favorite song on, you might have to sit there in your heated seat with your heating steering wheel and wait 5 more seconds because we're going to let the pedestrians go their place. You know how I feel about it, I guess. But it's like, yes, we should acknowledge to people that is. We are not trying to get people, we are not the state of Wisconsin DOT. We're not trying to get people from point A to point B as fast and as smooth as possible. Now, that's an exaggeration because they've Vision Zero too, but generally they do these system approaches, and it's like, I want to get somebody from Manitowoc to Fond du Lac as fast as possible. I want as few driveways and whatever else I can get on them. We're saying here, we're just going to try to get people, we're going to move all the people around. We're going to balance economic. We know we have to it can't take you an hour and a half to get from West Side Elementary to the high school. But if it takes you an extra minute, so instead of 7 minutes, it takes you 8 minutes because we've improved all the biking and pedestrian infrastructure you've said that's what you want, and that's what we're gonna design. And the other thing you've said is, even though you want all that, we're not gonna just figure out where $20 million is and make it happen. So you're taking an incremental approach, and we're gonna do this as time and finances permit. So that's the two main ones that I saw to just try to point out, is that we have plans and we're gonna implement them, but we can only do them as fast as the resources. You haven't told us raise taxes 10% so that you can significantly advance these plans. But I think the other thing loud and clear is, like, this is not a pro bike or it's not a pedestrian only plan or whatever, but it certainly prioritizes more improvements in safety, which is likely going to be around. It's likely going to slow down your travel in a car. And that's a trade-off that we're saying is okay. Again, there's all the language in the comprehensive plan that says we're not going to forget about economic development. We know that you still have goods and services and people. We still got to get kids to school and people to work, but you're going to talk about, on a percentage basis, it's going to be significant percentage changes in the time of queue and travel time in a car, comparatively speaking. And that's where you're going to get the emails and calls and whatever, because it's going to be like, why should I wait? I had to wait for the second green light on Main Street. I never had to do that. Why should I have to do that? That's coming, right? Coming to a city. Yeah, coming to a city near you. But we're gonna have more people walking to Starbucks because the sidewalk is there for people to go, right? I mean, how many people are we now seeing with all these grocery bags? Now that's anecdotal data, but I mean, I literally am seeing more people with grocery bags from Aldi's. They walked all the way from campus or from downtown because they know, hey, I can just get on the sidewalk, I can get all the way out and all the way back. It's safe, predictable, and that's a good thing, right? Their life is better because of that you guys did, that we only spent a lot less money than I would have expected. So you can feel good about that. And we'll need to hear more policy on the development side. We'll need to talk that through as a council, where you can tell us, okay, we want all this housing, we gotta meet the housing needs. How much are we gonna pile on the housing developers? Because that's another whole nother policy thing. But on the other hand, we wanna help, they need to help with the system. And then you got the big fun of the downtown plan, right? There's gonna be all kinds of trade-offs in that plan about parking and pedestrians and outdoor commerce and how people access, and then the safety, because again, it'll probably take you a lot more time to get from Maple Street to Cascade 10 years from now than it does today if we implement the plan that we're probably going to implement in a car. It'll take you longer in a car to do that.
Amy, what studies do we have to do yet, or what do we have to learn yet that we don't know?
Well, I think part of the Safe Streets for All plan is going to be some more studies included in that that'll give us some more information. So I think that's our first step, is to dig into that. And I don't know if you have examples or more details on what that looks like.
I don't. I know that a lot of work will go into implementing the Safe Streets for All action plan, and that will take the roadmap that we have, which is the bike ped plan, and fine tune it to what the community's vision is.
Go ahead, jump in.
So I won't speak for River Falls, the Safe Street for All grant, but I do know from other experiences, it looks at equity and it looks at kind of this community engagement piece of it. So it kind of really brings in what we talked about already for those complete streets and pulling that into the action plan to say, okay, where do we make sure that we are accommodating all of the users through, and really looking at that time from point A to point B through all modes and saying, okay, are we accommodating this to the best as we can, both from a safety perspective and from an operations perspective. So it gives a lot more data to be able to show how that all works together.
Okay. And Todd, I think it's maybe you or maybe Amy, with the traffic counter sensors that we have, how many do we have and how often are they out there? Are they out there right now? And I just don't see them up because they're not the road ropes anymore.
We do have a traffic counter, and we have a pretty nice one. We generally probably have them out once a month, and generally we're responding to citizen concerns.
Citizens' concerns, okay. So this is maybe something then we could use as besides just concerns, just to try to get some data and collect, considering we already have the devices, there's really not a cost to it, just put them up and let it count.
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything?
Chris did.
Well, I was gonna ask, so our current subdivision ordinance requires 28-foot rights of way in new construction, is that on residential streets? What's the requirement? 66 foot. And is there a minimum pavement width?
Pavement width varies, but typically it's 29 feet from the face of the curb.
Okay. And have we thought about changing that? Because I mean, we talk about, you mentioned lane widths is controlling how people drive, right? And the narrower lanes cause people to drive slower.
That 29 feet is actually already fairly narrow, and it is. I mean, I can't take any credit for it, but 29 feet with cars parked on both sides does not leave a lot of drive lane left. So it is an intentional design to keep traffic slow on local roads.
And what about paint? I mean, we talked about a lot of interventions on streets that kind of cost a lot. If you're talking about chicanes and medians and yada yada, but paint can do a lot as well. Like I think of the street in front of my house. I live on Kennedy. It's basically 40 feet curb to curb, and it looks like a runway. Like honestly, you could land reasonably sized jets on it. So you can imagine that cars go pretty fast, and so I'm tempted to go out there with just a gallon of paint, start painting stripes on the road just on my own volition, because that can help slow cars down. So is there any policy of just painting the roads, like painting in a parking lane and painting in a walk, even a bike lane, painting yellow lines down the middle? Because that visible change can affect behavior, and that's a pretty cheap intervention on some of the streets we have that are like mine, 40 feet wide.
Yeah, Kennedy Street is a wide street. And that's something we could consider. Painting a 10-foot wide lane, a center line, and painting 2 10-foot wide lanes to see what impact that has on traffic speeds.
Because chaos helps. I mean, we've all seen the videos of those crazy intersections, where there's like 40,000 people all going different directions at the same time. Not too many people die in those intersections because it's chaos. Like the easier we make driving, the less we think about it. To your point of like driving through the red light, we're like, was it red? Was it green? How many of us have gone somewhere and like gotten to our destination, but like, I don't remember driving here, but I'm here, right? We do that because it's so easy and safe to drive that we don't think too much about it. So it's adding chaos to it.
Mr. Mayor, I made a promise when I said that we'd use this council for the workshop that we'd end promptly at 6:15 so staff can get the room set. So I imagine that Andi is available and staff is here too in the transition, but I think we'll probably have to have a part 2 if we want to have a part 2.
So, Mayor, respectfully, I didn't hear any questions or comments on the assumptions. Should we assume that there's agreement on them? Good, thank you.
Anything else you guys need from us right now? We'll just be patient for you guys in the next this is what we're gonna do, is what we wanna do.
Yes, thank you.
Andy, thanks for coming up, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks guys for being part of this stuff.
I'm sorry?
And I assume we're adjourned, Mr. Mayor? Workshop.
The whole exercise thing. I'm totally still in that class.
I asked Amy to be going. I was like, so how much time do I have? Can we do an exercise? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay. Well, then I won't bring crayons. It's fine. Right? You didn't know. Amy said no to my crayons.